Thanks for joining us. Today's webinar is going to focus on the state of zero trust in the industrial enterprise. So what we're going to do is share insights from a recent research project and survey that we conducted. We spoke to or got results from 250, more than 250 OT, IT, and cybersecurity professionals from various industries and across various regions. And the goal really is to understand the impact and the current status of zero trust, the journey that the industrial enterprises have undertaken. So we're going to explore the findings. Bear with me for a second. We're going to explore the findings, the responses that we received. So before we do that, let's proceed. Let me introduce you to Shri, who's joining us from Xage on the call. Shri, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. Sri Sundarlingam, I head up marketing and business development at Xage Security. We are a global solution provider for zero trust access and protection capabilities. Jonathan, I wanted to thank you and the industrial cyber community for undertaking this survey and looking forward to the discussion today.
Likewise, yes, it was a great project to work on. So my name's Jonathan Gordon, known to many of you as the directing analyst here at Takepoint Research. And we really specialize in industrial cybersecurity. So we try and help people like yourselves, asset owners and operators, trying to understand the market landscape, the technology, the solutions, and so on. So without further ado, let's take a look at the agenda. We have a packed agenda today. I'll try and walk through it run through it quickly, but hopefully it will still make sense. So we're going to guide you through the report, beginning with an overview of zero trust, really definition. I guess it's our definition, and then look at the significance for IT and OT within the industrial sector and these enterprises. And the focus is going to include the survey demographics, the key roles, identifying key stakeholders, and the factors that are driving this interest and driving adoption. So what's really driving this traction, and then why now, right? That's the most interesting thing. So we're going to look a little bit at the diversity across these different industries. They're not all the same. And the survey feedback, it really reveals these distinct perspectives, and I'll probably say this on each slide as we go through. The perspectives on zero trust and the answers that we receive really change based on the industry, the nature of the enterprise and the business, and even the participants and their roles. So then we're going to look at the unique challenges of securing OT within these environments, and this evolving role of what we refer to as the industrial CISO, the Industrial Chief Information Security Officer. And then very quickly, we'll run back to look at the number one use case for zero trust in this environment, and then very briefly look at how to build a business case for zero trust. And then we will hopefully leave time for questions. And so if anybody does have any questions through the presentation, just click on the Q&A button or the chat button, and we'll get to it as soon as possible. We'll try and keep them for the Q&A session. And if we don't have enough time, we will definitely get back to you offline. So let's get into it. There's a lot to get through. So zero trust, it's important to keep in mind, is not a product or a technology per se, but it's really a strategic mind shift, a mindset that's particularly crucial when we're talking about critical infrastructure and things like manufacturing. So it really challenges the traditional notion that's sort of trust-based, right? And typically the trust is based on location. Either you're inside the perimeter and trusted, or you're outside the perimeter and untrusted. And so the market now is moving towards this continuous verification of trust, identity, role, the access requirements, right? The needs, regardless of where you are, right? Your position relative to the perimeter, the cybersecurity perimeter, but also whether you're an employee or come from outside the organization. So it's particularly relevant in terms of the industrial setting, where a lot of third parties and OEMs and contractors come and are really inside that trust zone. And they're accessing critical assets and data within the OT environment. So Zero Trust really aims to enhance security by ensuring a very granular level of control. And the idea is to reduce that risk and, of course, increase the reliability and the resilience and safety of those operational systems. So keeping that in mind, and also the fact that there are a lot of different interpretations of Zero Trust. It's not sort of a fixed definition. But I think the ultimate goal remains very consistent. It's about mitigating a lot of these risks and doing that more effectively. So I guess we've established what it is more or less. Let's jump into the actual survey. So the survey itself was conducted from, I think it was late December through to February this year. And we engaged over 250 or 260 professionals in industrial companies in various roles, IT and OT, again, across industries and across regions. And what you can see here are some of the different industries that respondents came from. So you can see here, manufacturing really led the responses, 27%. And on top of that, you have a significant representation from across the board, right? Energy, oil and gas, pharmaceuticals, automotive, a lot of transportation in here, water sectors, etc. So this diversity responses that we got really enriched the overall findings. But in fact, it can also mask some very specific industry nuances. And today, hopefully, we'll get a chance to dive deeper into these distinct industry challenges and insights and pull them apart a little bit. In addition, excuse me. In addition, what you can see here is the breakdown of responses by role. So we talk to people from IT, OT, cybersecurity, operational roles. You can see the CISO in here. So the largest part was actually 32% from operational roles. These are people in engineering or operations, plant managers, automations engineers, people actually sitting out in the field, which is fantastic to get their input on this as well, because it's really an issue that cuts across end to end with regards to the technology. But you can also see security administrators, managers and CISOs, etc. And down here, you can actually see some of the job titles of people that responded. And what you'll see is that they're very different. Every organization and every person literally has a different title. So it's still a bit of a moving target to figure out who is involved and what their title is. So best thing to do is ask how they're involved in the process. Last one on the demographic. Yeah.
I was just going to make a couple of points. I think it's good to see more and more IT cyber teams are involved from a cyber physical system security perspective. We're definitely seeing this at Xage. There's more engagement, cross-functional engagement to work with the operational technology teams, and pretty much like any major initiative like a Zero Trust initiative requires that, right? That cross-functional coordination between the IT, the OT, and the cyber teams to work together. Everything from strategy, to project execution. So, great to see the survey kind of reflecting what we're seeing in the market as well.
I agree, and apologies for running away there. I was in the groove, but yeah, I think and this will come back on each slide and again beyond the webinar as well, that it's about diversity, and the more people and the more diversity we have in these projects, the better off the result will be from a risk mitigation point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So this slide, again, the last one on the demographic side is further, you can see the roles again, and this is broken down again by region. So the biggest responses, I think, were from North America. You see from Asia to North America, and how to read this is really, so if you're here, for example, 32 people, this is actually the count of respondents, 32 respondents were OT roles in North America, and similarly 37 from EMEA. And you see here, CISO's 19 from North America, etc. So I won't sort of pull this apart any further, but I think it's definitely worth coming back to this when you review the report itself in detail. So as we said, this diversity really sets the stage for exploring some of the key motivators and driving factors behind the sort of interest that's coming to the fore. So finally, we get on to some of the actual responses. And this is really about what's driving the interest. So we wanted to gauge, really to understand why the interest in zero trust coming to the fore at the moment. And you can see the top responses here very much so around this modernization, the need to modernize. And I guess the way we make sense of this is it's also modernization in terms of staying, keeping pace with the developments in the actual threat landscape as that continues to evolve all the time, right? But also in the terms of innovation. So we see things like this hyperconnectivity. We see things like IoT and IIoT, but also AI, which is definitely a topic that's coming to the fore as well. So there's lots of innovation going. So there's a need to continue to innovate, I guess, on the cybersecurity side as well. Regulatory pressure is also something that comes up, plays a significant role, and it's spurred by a lot of the executive orders, for example, aimed at improving the nation's cybersecurity, and also regional specific mandates like the NIS2, NIS2 in Europe, the CCOP in Singapore, and more regional, but also we see a lot of vertical efforts as well. So, for example, the TSA mandates for pipelines and transportation and things like that. So all of this is really pushing interest into integrating those zero trust principles into the wider cybersecurity strategy. You can also see some people said COVID-19. So that was, again, that shift towards that remote work underlying, I guess, the need to really secure that remote access. And of course, when you get an incident, post-incident, or what we call the day after effect, it's always much easier to have this conversation about, okay, can we look at something new? So I think the overarching goal, as we said, is to minimize the risk, and this seen particularly through things like remote access and this privileged access. So curbing some of the lateral movement from the IT into the OT and then further down into some of the production areas.
Yeah, the comment I was going to make here, Jonathan, is as you said, there's no surprise. There's been more and more government regulatory requirements, right? Especially towards the critical infrastructure industries. I personally, I had anticipated, cyber incident would have been in the top two requirement, right, for driving kind of the modernization towards the cybersecurity programs. The joke in the industry is it takes a breach to get funding sometimes, so
Small breach. We
so it
don't want
was
a
a
large
bit of
one.
exactly. So it was a bit of a surprise that it was not in the top two, but it's good. Good. I mean, it's still interesting. It's in the top three in terms of what's driving the need to modernize.
Yeah, I think you have to keep in mind also that not everybody is able to or likes to discuss the breaches. So I think that probably plays a little bit on the responses as well, even though it was an anonymous survey. But yeah,
Agreed.
I agree. Yeah. Well, this was, I guess, a follow-on from driving the interest, and this question is really around convergence. We hear a lot and talk a lot about OT IT or IT OT convergence, And what we see is across different verticals, different sectors, albeit not universally. So some segments are different, but we can see if we average it out here, and what we see here is a breakdown per size of company. 77% of the smaller companies, 71% of the larger. But I think across the board, we do see that people believe that this sort of integration or convergence or collaboration and the digital transformation itself can significantly boost things like productivity. We talked about that before. And there's a demand for more data and sharing more data and increased connectivity, etc. So I think the bottom line here, or the key takeaway, is this is happening. So the question really is, how do we address the associated risks rather than say, hey, let's stop this happening. So I think that's the key from my side. I mentioned this briefly already, that not all industries are the same, and this really highlights the fact that we're dealing with a broad array. Sorry, I slipped a slide. A broad array of industries. So you can see here, this is a list taken from CISA, which identifies the top, I think it's 16 if I remember. And you can see actually the departments that are associated with those particular verticals, sometimes more than one. So it's not a simple thing, but this is just critical infrastructure. So not including general manufacturing. There is critical manufacturing thing in here. And the EU has a very similar breakdown. So the crucial insight here is really to recognize that there are sometimes subtle and sometimes very significant differences between industries, or even within the industries, right? If you consider power, power generation, power distribution, oil and gas, so you have the upstream, the midstream, the downstream operations. So they might appear similar or a whole industry from the outside or from very high level, but they have very specific concerns and challenges that can vary rather greatly when you drill down. So again, the diversity means varying levels of maturity as well across these sectors. So let's move on to look at some of the questions that we asked in this sort of area as well. So looking at the very sort of motivations for adopting or looking at zero trust across different industries, and what we did is pull out 3 industries here that are hopefully quite different. So you can see, for example, in the oil and gas up here, 50% of respondents highlighted that regulatory requirements was their primary motivation. And the energy sector is not too far behind that. So if you look at things like, especially in North America with NUCSIP, that makes a lot of sense. And I think with the TSA pipeline sort of directives coming through as well, that makes a lot of sense. But if you look at manufacturing, the regulatory requirements really dropped to 21%. So again, this contrasts with if you look at manufacturing, 40%, 46% have this need to modernize. So I think you see this diversification of strategies and reasons for looking at zero trust across the verticals once you delve a little deeper into it. So that becomes quite interesting.
Yeah, I was just going to provide some commentary as well, Jonathan, based on what we're seeing at Xage and the oil and gas industry, post colonial pipelines, hack situation we had. There were a lot of there was a directive rolled out from the Department of Homeland Security, specifically TSA, who oversees oil and gas pipeline operators here in the U.S. So that create a lot of movement to modernize cybersecurity programs, everything and anything from, better credential management, to at an asset level to improving the overall security posture, right, in the environment. So not very surprising, to see those results. And utilities, energy and utilities, as you mentioned, NERC-CIP has been in place for a while. So compliance is a huge driver there. So, and then, manufacturing, what's interesting is there's a lot of modernization going on because of new business initiatives, right? As we know, so your next gen factory
Mm.
projects, right? Driving a lot of, cloud, everything from AI, right? Type of technologies that requires cloud adoption that essentially has expanded the attack footprint quite a bit. So I'm not surprised to see there, like in the manufacturing industries, it's kind of the business initiatives driving the need to, modernize cybersecurity programs.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We see a lot of greenfields on the manufacturing side, starting to look at cybersecurity from the get-go, so sort of shifting left and building it into their design. So definitely a lot more discussion and interest in that area too.
Hmm.
Um, I get this is a similar type of look, but this is broken down by region. So again, interesting, and sometimes I guess it follows the discussion. We look at this need to modernize. It's quite flat across the different regions, but when we look at regulatory requirements, again, you can see some regions, I guess, are more mature with regards to where they are in the regulatory process, and maybe some others are less so. So again, it reflects the nuances between the type of business, the sectors, but also the regions that they happen to be in. And of course, a lot of companies operate across multiple regions. So again, it can get quite complex. Um, excuse me. So I think that the answer is, and we saw this very much at the high level, that companies are moving, industrial enterprises are moving, and definitely looking at zero trust. What we do see responses in the survey, and also this reflected in a lot of the inquiries that we receive on our research and advisory platforms, that people are looking at it, but not all at the same pace or same sense of urgency. I think this is quite borne out quite well here when we look at manufacturing. Right, we ask what's the view of the integration of IT and OT, and this is the view with regards to do you think that this is the pathway to progress? Right? Do you think that digital transformation and convergence will lead to more productivity and success? So 85% said yes in manufacturing, while you can see only 35% in oil and gas. And on the flip side, 2% said no, no way, and 15% in oil and gas. So you can see again, very, very different pictures depending on who you ask. Even the term digital transformation in some verticals can elicit very different responses and mixed reactions. So again, manufacturing might be a little more IT and cloud and IoT friendly, where some of the more traditional critical infrastructure providers will be more conservative, focusing more on prioritizing safety, productivity, and uptime, and not also boils down to the risk appetite of these type of companies as well. So I think there's a lot here in the mix. So what are the key challenges? This is a very, very busy slide, which Sri pointed out to me, and I agree. Now I see it again. So we'll work through this together. Um, we surveyed the respondents primarily on what's the primary challenge really in securing the OT environment. So what are the top concerns around OT IT integration, for example? And you can see here the breakdown is very much so it's according to what they selected. For example, here 82% of OT people, right? This is broken down by role. 82% of OT people said the IT OT integration is what keeps them awake at night. And here, for example, you can see on the flip side, 95% of cyber people, and the CISO in particular, 86% said the risk of ransomware keeps them awake at night. So again, it really depends on who you're speaking to. So the key part here, and we'll get to that hopefully in the business case, you need to understand the audience, who's in the room, and understand what motivates them and what their worldview is. So you look at different things like patching, and where it falls off dramatically in the IT side and cybersecurity side, but again, still quite high on the OT side. So again, the disparity really highlights the unique operational and security challenges faced by each side and highlights the distinct concerns between them. My assumption is if and when we do this research again next year, we start to see these gaps get reduced, not go away completely, but start to see them reduced.
Yeah, I think, this kind of goes back to my point earlier, Jonathan. I think it's really critical for the IT, OT, cyber teams to come together.
Mhm.
Everything from formulating the strategy, right, in terms of, how are they going to, evolve their architecture, right, their cybersecurity program to adopt zero trust capabilities, everything from strategy to working out the plan and execution. I think that cross-functional coordination is going to be key for success.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we see that all the time. Um, so this is about the expectations. So when we double click and drill down on the responses, um, we're really we're really trying to figure out why or what people are expecting when they look at zero trust. So keep in mind that I guess many people have started the zero trust journey in these spaces, but not everyone's sort of progressed to the same stage and may still be at the beginning of the process. So we talked more about the expectations of what they're looking to gain, and three areas really emerged, and they're quite similar in size. So 26% said they anticipate this improvement, I guess, in reducing the complexities around this identity-based control or access control based on identity. And similarly, you see the same number looking at more of a strategic level. I guess another 26% really looking at integrating zero trust and this identity based approach into their overall strategy. So together, it's quite a high number as well. And then lastly, you see the concept of boosting productivity and resilience, which again, I guess is comes a little bit from the OT side, but it's also a goal of the overall sort of programs as well.
Which is that's an interesting kind of, responses to kind of reflect on, Jonathan, because I think security should not come at the cost of productivity. And I think this is where the security teams, kind of need to figure out, like, yes, you want to evolve the capabilities and right overall security posture, but if it impacts the productivity, right, and the overall efficiency of the operational teams, then you're not achieving the end goal. And a lot of the times, security controls you put in place get neglected or get bypassed, right? And you end up with the negative impacts of it. So, and we've seen it in the market when we work with different type of customers. When you improve security, and at the same time, like we had a situation where an oil and gas customer had so many different OEM systems. Each system you had to do access management in a certain way, right? It was so difficult. Like, the playbook for operator was just so complex in terms of how they would access different types of systems and what they have to do, day in and day out. When we worked on that project with them, when we improved security and at the same time, when we were able to improve the efficiency, right, and
Mhm.
reduce complexity by
Yeah.
improving efficiency, the adoption went up quite a bit.
Mm.
So I think, ultimately, yes, you got to improve security, but it can be at the cost of, productivity and the end user experience.
Yeah, and I think and actually it's a good segue into the next slide, because when we look and when we drill down, just to go back there, so this is the overall picture, but when we drill down at the results looking from an OT perspective, so the boost productivity literally jumps to 29%. So again, the focus changes depending on the role, but I think what you mentioned now is this usability. Oftentimes we forget that these people in the plants, the automation engineers, the plant managers, the control system folks, they're often the users of these systems. So they're not always technical, and definitely not cybersecurity experts or even IT experts. And they're trying to do something that's not related to cybersecurity. They're trying to do their role. So usability is incredibly important, right? It needs to be as transparent as possible and not putting up barriers and sort of creating friction for these people that are using the system. And again, similar, even though we look from the IT side, you have this again focus on fostering the identity-based approach. But again, on the IT side, it's also about usability from a management point of view, administrative point of view. So at the same time, you're getting more and more granular around the continuous verification and least privileged access, but you want to make it just as usable, more usable in the current sort of approach that they have today. So I think your point there is fantastic, and crucial really to the success of any sort of rollout of this type of approach. Um,
Yeah, just to kind of hit on a little bit more, Jonathan, I think also
yeah,
just the overall effort to roll out the program, if it's not manageable, if it's not, you know what I mean, if it's
yeah.
not cannot be phased out for the IT and the OT teams, then also chances of project failing is high as well. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's a what we've seen is like most things in the OT space, a very delicate balancing act, and you need to get it right the first time, bringing the right people in, um, and and also um, plan it and bring people in early to the process and make sure usability is a key factor in the project success. Like you said, if they can't use it, they won't use it, and engineers are very good at finding workarounds. Um, and this sort of is another good segue on to what we see as this sort of emerging role in the industrial space, what we call the industrial CISO, Chief Information Security Officer. So our research and inquiries also sort of point towards this emerging role. Again, the title itself is not critical. We've seen a lot of different people doing this role with different titles, but the role itself is evolving into this sort of executive level owner, if you like. So boards and management are tapping the CISO on the shoulder saying, you're now responsible for everything, IT, OT, whatever T it is. You've got to understand the risks and secure and minimize those risks, or uncover the risks and decide what we want to mitigate, what we want to transfer, what we want to accept. And we see that across both IT and OT. So the leadership really is looking for this one person, one role to unify cybersecurity management across, emphasizing the accountability. We talked about the planning, the prioritization, and really the accountability and the strategic oversight. So what we see is that on the very high level, they have this job communicating needs to the board, and that'll come back when we talk about the business case. But explain to management what it is and why it makes sense in a language that they can understand, right? It's about the business language, and also communicating, collaborating, and getting input from peers. So it might be VP operations or VP engineering. And sort of that's driving that approach towards creating this cyber resilient organization. And at the same time, sort of elevating OT cybersecurity and the need within your own structure, but also all the way up to the, I guess, the board, from the boardroom down to the control room, literally. And what we see is this more and more happening. And the good thing is that I guess the cybersecurity department and the CISO, instead of it being the department of no, which is something that we commonly associate with cybersecurity, right? Don't do that, stop that, it's not safe. Let's stop that connectivity, or we don't know what's going on. So there's a shift towards let's enable, right? We're here to enable this business innovation. And create this operational productivity, but we want to support it in a safe and a secure manner as possible. So it's really a shift towards enabling the processes instead of hindering. And we expect this to evolve as we keep looking at that as well. And some of those gaps, and I think the role of the CISO is really to help reduce some of those gaps by creating that, fostering that collaboration and communication. And flipping off in another direction, really now looking at some of the technology. The slide that we have up here, and again, I don't have too long to spend on this, but what we have here is a slide that presents our maturity model. So this is Takepoint Research maturity model for secure remote access. And it illustrates the fact that there are a lot of diverse approaches and levels or stages of maturity with regards to just securing the remote access within these environments. So if you look at the bottom left side, which is where the more immature organizations are, you'll see this focus on establishing a perimeter, so that security perimeter, and then hardening that perimeter. And as you move and shift right and up, you start to see some of these zero trust aspects and principles come in. And start to see that as a foundational steps in securing the remote access. So I guess that the slide itself is supposed to enable our customers and anyone obviously who's here to assess where they're starting from, right? You need to know where you are today. And the idea is to find out where you are and where you want to get to in terms of what resources you have, what sort of risks you want to mitigate, etc. And again, what's interesting is that it's very rare to find an organization that's operating all the way over here across all of their sites. What we see is that, especially in larger organizations, different sites can be at different levels of maturity. And again, the question is, what are the sites that are critical to the business, and how do we move those forward, and which ones do we not have to push all at the same time? So the model really encourages this tailored and customized approach, and recognizing that the path really to the high levels of maturity is based on contextual decisions and objectives, and of course, on each company's individual risk appetite as well. So, having said that, let's flip back to some of the responses. So, we asked. We want to understand the starting point for most organizations we saw is remote access, right? I think that's not a surprise, and we'll talk about that in the number one use case. So third-party access, extremely common. Remote, we can see here number one with regards to securing remote access. And again, the second one here also drives into that. A lot of it's about driving this productivity and greater efficiency, right? Lowering costs, not having to fly people out to remote sites or very sites that are very and not just far away but very remote. So it might be a drilling platform or something like that. And also we have things like operational oversight as well. So you can see there are a lot of reasons to enable remote access. And again, we talked about third-party access before. So we see that sort of continuing to play out. And the larger the organization in general, the larger the reliance on some of these external entities.
Yeah, I wanted to comment a little bit on the third-party access being the top driving requirement to modernize remote access, and it really makes a lot of sense. Glad to see the responses on that, because VPNs have been predominantly used in the past, whether in OT or IT environments for providing third-party access. And we've seen recently, with Ivanti, security risks we had, and several other VPN, traditional VPN solutions, also security risks being continued to continue to be sort of exploited, right, in the wild. I think one of the most commonly exploited set of vulnerabilities is to use VPNs, right, and compromise credentials to get into these environments where you have unfettered access, right? You can move around and carry out a larger scale attacks. So I think it's really good to see this in terms of how folks are thinking about it, and zero trust is a great way to go in terms of how it can be applied to re-architect, right? Remote access, and for specific use cases like third-party access to provide access for what they need, a granular level of access, as well as when they need to have access to those systems. And then your point on the improving the efficiency, I'm glad to see that being the second response as well, because if you can do this in a very secure way, right? Remote access, and you can also enable this ability to, do the collaboration, right? Where you
Mm,
can bring in experts from all different parts of the world to help you fix problems a lot quicker, right?
yeah.
And restore your plant. I mean, this is more the power to you. So glad to see, a lot of the folks are thinking along those lines, right? Not just improve security, but hey, I can also use it to make the point or make the plan, right? And show the ROI in terms of improved efficiency and productivity and, improved business benefits due to that.
Yeah, and getting the skills where they're needed, and that's what you mentioned. So I guess stretching them across the whole organization as opposed to having them in particular sites. Um, good point. I'm afraid that we're running a little late, so I'll try and speed up and spend less time on some of these graphs, charts. It's evident when we looked at the maturity model and from the responses that people already have often some sort of remote access solution and some sort of security in place. Sure, you mentioned VPNs. Again, that's quite common. Some people have unfortunately still direct access to internet as well, or jump boxes in place. So we asked them, what are the top three concerns regarding the current solution in terms of cybersecurity? And I guess that no surprise here, because we've talked about it for a number of slides already, is this complexity, difficult to manage or difficult to navigate from an end user point of view. On top of that, again, we've talked about compliance as well. So people saying there's some missing features for compliance that might be logging or recording sessions, etc. And I think the other interesting part is the scalability issue. All right, what worked? So some simple solutions or homegrown solutions that worked when they were quite small or worked at a particular plant, they're just not scalable for needs of a wider or larger or a more complex environment. So we can see that as well. Um, so when we looked at, so I just want to make sure I didn't slip a slide by accident. So when we asked folks, how does this zero touch approach really compare to some of the existing solutions? And we found that 50% of people assume that or claim that it's somewhat more effective. 29% thought that's more of the same. So again, half the respondents consider it to be more effective, and that could be that again, it's easier or less complex or easier to deploy and easier to use as well. I think what we see is that depending on where you are in the maturity model. So for example, if you're down the left bottom of the maturity model, so you're just sort of getting started, the zero trust approach and principles can get you a quick win. It can move you significantly up and to the right. And if you're in the middle, the zero trust overlay can really sort of help tie things together and sometimes patch over some of the gaps between the solutions that you already have. And if you're already in the top right sort of area, it kind of ties everything together, right? You have this common set of principles and approach towards the cybersecurity that you may not have had before. So again, it depends where you are in the maturity level. The somewhat more effective could also be the fact that people have been deploying things for quite a while and they're not too sure or not too happy with how with the results. So they may have stuff deployed, but they may have still been breached. So again, it's hard to specifically tell from the answers here. But again, we've seen this reduced complexity and increased usability come up time and time again. And the bottom line is it's another crucial layer of defense, right? We always talk about defense in depth when it comes to securing these environments. So the zero trust is a really, really good sort of overlay and add on to that. I hope that makes sense. So this one is what we asked them. Is an interesting question because we say, okay, there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of people looking at it. What's holding you back? Why aren't you moving faster? We'll look at how quickly people are deploying in a minute. You'll see it's not as fast as maybe we would have expected. So what's holding you back? And we see the primary hurdles is really this integration with legacy systems. So I won't spend too much time here because we're almost at the top of the hour, but this keeps coming up all the time. It's like, how do we integrate this with legacy systems? We have systems that have been in place for 20, 30 years, along with the people and processes as well. The big challenge is how do we get people to both change their mindset and look at this type of thing, but also how do we then go and integrate into some of those technologies that are around? And that's definitely by far the number one challenge that we heard from respondents. Very quickly, I thought this would be a good point in the presentation and time to share. This is a very simple RACI model for those. So most people are familiar with this, but the model really looks at the roles and responsibilities that, in this case, for the project of deploying and securing remote access. So it highlights the involvement who's needed from various project participants, including asset owners, the OT teams, the cybersecurity teams, the SOC teams, but also external third party. We talked about OEMs as well. So the illustration here is really simplifies a lot of the complexities, and a real sort of world RACI chart would be a little bit more complex and more in depth, but it gives you the idea of how to approach this type of project. And what we do is we ask participants what level of support they're receiving from their organization. So this could be from their management or managers, but it also could be from their peers within the different environments. So the very good news is that there's a lot of support here. So combining very supportive with somewhat supportive, we get over 80%, which is very, very encouraging to see that people are looking at this. And again, I think that goes back to a lot of the communication and bringing these people in. And that's really why we tried to look at who are the roles and people that need to be brought in, even from day one. And I think that that's incredibly important. We talked about that a couple of times. So where are we today? And this is the question that we ask participants as well. Where are you with regards to the process? We kind of laid out 5 different stages or steps, starting with initial buy-in, circulating the concept of zero trust, and then sitting with teams out in the field and mapping out assets, figuring out what's critical and what's not. And who needs access to those critical and what level of privileges do they need? Then looking at a strategy, developing a strategy to actually implement and roll that out, through to deployment, actually getting it deployed, and then obviously optimizing it and feedback into the model. So without further ado, this is what we got from participants. So where are we today? So currently about 20% of people haven't, or of respondents, I should say, haven't yet sort of commenced a real sort of focus on zero trust. But the good news is that 18% are actively discussing, so that they're at that buy-in stage. They're having organizational discussions with both management, but also teams out in the field. The 23% are mapping out assets and critical parts of their technology and environments to understand who needs access to what, both internally, those third parties, and external as well. And we see the top here, the peak of the wave is really in this strategy development. So between the mapping and strategy, people are already figuring out, okay, we have all this information. We know what our critical pieces of equipment are, what's actually generating value to the organization, how we protect them. So how do we roll this out? So again, it's kind of like a wave, and it does drop off towards deployment. I think what we're seeing, and I think in our discussions with some end users as well, a lot of people are at that stage between strategy and deployment of putting out POCs, right, working through the complexities, both on the people side and process side. And then also we looked at that integration with legacy technology. So there's a lot of complexity that needs to be overcome from the strategy to the deployment. And I think that's where a lot of the POCs come in at this stage. So the good news is the market is definitely maturing and signaling that I guess it understands zero trust in its own sort of context and the value of that. So that's the good news. My expectations are when we do this research next year and the year after, we will see this wave literally sort of wash through. Again, it needs to be contextualized, it needs to be understood within those individual organizations, but it's definitely happening. This is a slide. I know we have just 5 minutes, but this slide that I really wanted to get to, and I'll spend 2 minutes, and then Sri's going to jump in and give us a little bit about how they do it. Um, Building the business case. We talked about remote access is a fantastic starting point. Why? Because it's a pain for everyone. It's a pain for the users. It's a pain for employees. It's a pain for third parties and OEMs, etc. And it's a vector where we see a lot of attacks going through, especially if there are critical equipment attached directly to um, to the internet, or if there are people, even third parties, that are given too many privileges, right? VPNs normally just open up to everyone once you're authenticated. And so the process really very, very quickly on one leg is you quantify the risks, right? What are the critical parts of technology, the critical sites that create value to the organization? Those are the areas that you want to start focusing on. You want to talk to the people, get out of the office, get into the plants, get onto the factory floor. Measure the gaps with the current solution, look at what you have in place and what are the gaps between where you are. Again, use models like the maturity model, document and look at the costs and the alternatives. And again, continue to converse with stakeholders, both up and down the organization, across the organization. There are also unexpected upsides, right? We've spoken to a couple of end users who looked at doing things like this, and what they found is the fact that they were recording a lot of these sessions meant they could use that for training. So they're training engineers. So that's what I call an unexpected upside in a business case. It's not the value we're looking for, but it's on top or aside. So it gives you a little bit more when it comes to the ROI. Document the project, the RESI model we talked about, obviously the budget, deployment plan, and the ROI is critical, right? Look at that value, go back to the risk, quantify the risk to the business, make sure that you can show the ROI with regards to the quantify, don't just say it's going to be more secure, we're going to mitigate risk, quantify those risks to the organization. And then one of the most important things is present the business model and those risks and the value to stakeholders in their language. Don't talk about vulnerabilities. Don't talk about patches. Talk about value at risk. Talk about the value to the organization if it's downtime for a particular site or a piece of equipment or a particular area. What the impact is on production, what the impact is on the bottom line, what the impact is on customers, it might be on the environment, it might be on the reputation of the company. These are things that top level management people understand. So having zoomed through that, I'm going to quickly hand it over to Sri, who's going to run us through from a Xage perspective how that all sort of ties together. Sri.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Jonathan. So Xage, we're focused on providing zero trust access and protection for the entire enterprise. So we do look at it across IT, OT, and the cloud footprint. And one of the unique capabilities we have brought to market is to take a mesh architecture-based approach for deploying zero trust so that you don't have to make a lot of network changes, asset changes, right? So you take an overlay approach to deploying zero trust controls that are identity based, right? And that can control every interactions and assets, down to like individual devices, whether they're legacy or modern. So like we've had customers implement our system and be able to do everything from account management and password rotation to legacy devices, as much as you can do that in a uniform way with some of the modern devices, and then be able to implement things like single sign-on with multi-factor authentication, right? Without compromising on the security controls, while you're optimizing on the workflow, right? And making it easier for your end users to access, the assets that they need to have access, and enable collaboration securely with third parties as well. So as I mentioned earlier, security doesn't have to come at the cost of productivity and efficiency. So we try to really pay attention to all of those when we work with customers. We provide several solutions as mentioned on this slide. You could start with the modernizing of remote access, capabilities, whether you're focusing on, privilege access, right, internally for your teams, where they're accessing, assets and systems in your operational environments or in your enterprise environment. You're focusing on third-party access as a key use case to modernize remote access. And we provide privilege access management capabilities along with our remote access capabilities because one without the other doesn't really quite work in these environments. And we can implement PAM with capabilities without having to deploy agents or clients on systems because many of you know, you cannot deploy agents or clients on, PLCs and SCADA systems. So this is where Xage has provided flexible capabilities to be able to deploy zero trust access controls in different types of environments and be able to deploy it in distributed environments as well. That was one of the responses in the survey that
Mm.
zero trust security
Yeah.
controls, right, need to work in distributed environments, even if you lose connectivity to the cloud or to the core side. And yeah, I mean, we're working with large infrastructure operators, right, in energy to utilities, department, defense, right, manufacturing as well, and so many other industries. Um, we were talking about the ROI in one of your earlier slides, Jonathan, and we've had customers tell us they've been able to recuperate the cost of deploying Xage within 3 months, not just from a security perspective, right, being able to contain threats, but improving productivity and efficiency. Like
Mm.
one of the things you mentioned is, hey, if you hire third parties and they're accessing your system to troubleshoot, fix something, you can record that entire session
Yeah.
not for security purpose, but you can use it to train your own teams as well. So
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. We're flush up against the end of the hour. So there were a few questions came in. There are a couple of easy questions. We are recording a session, so we'll make it available. The slides, I put my email out there, hit me up. I'll send you a copy of the slides. There are a couple of other questions that came in. They're a little bit more in depth, and we'll answer them offline. I apologize for running out of time. The one thing that I will say with regards to what Shri mentioned is what I really like about this approach is that it takes into account the complexities of all the different types of organizations that are out there. It understands that it's not a black or white, it's not a rip or replace. Typically 99% it's a brownfield environment. There's always stuff out there. So it's a question of how do we move from here to here and take everybody with us, but not break anything, but in the same time sort of do a better job at mitigating and addressing some of those risks, so that the zero trust approach really shows promise in being able to do that without sort of breaking something. And so it's fitting on in that overlay. So very exciting. We run over time. Very quick thanks to Industrial Cyber, Xage for sponsoring the session. Thank you to Shri. Most importantly, thank you to all the people joining, all the hard work that you're doing to protect these critical environments. And we really hope that you got some value out of today's session. And be sure to grab a copy of the report. It's available online if you haven't received it yet. And we hope to see you all in our next session. So thank you very much.
thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you.